Hello, Professor Sylvie Albert. We are here today to talk about creating ideas, ideation. And we have here with us Al McLeod, who's been joining us through all of those videos, and John Ferris, President and CEO of Envision Edge, a innovation engineering group who focuses on strategy for organizations as well as developing cultures of innovation. So welcome both of you. Looking forward to your thoughts as to how organizations can move forward with creating some ideas. So, let's start with you, Al. We have a little bit of a process here. We've talked about the 8 essentials of innovation, so maybe we can just start with saying, where are we on that, all of those 8 steps that we've been talking about up to now?
Yes, so this is a framework that we've used throughout our presentations. Right now we're at the discover and evolve stages. So just to remind you again, aspire, choose, discover, evolve. And so we're now at the point where we're trying to take some of those insights we have and come up with ideas for the business.
Okay, so let's talk about how innovation is executed. So maybe you can explain now that little basic diagram. That's a great tool.
Yeah, so this is a very high-level diagram that Alvin Turner did for his book, Be Less Zombie, one of my favorite books. We've talked about it before. So starting from the left, begin by identifying the right opportunities and designing innovation questions. So what are the things you're going to do, or what are the areas you want to explore? So this is like finding opportunities, trying to find things that your customers want. Then the next stage is about finding solutions. So generating ideas, assessing and selecting ideas, and then testing them quickly with experiments in market, scaling and integrating those experiments in order to go to bring them to the world. And of course, you're trying to find a viable business model that so that you can actually make money.
Excellent. There's a similar process that you use in your innovation engineering. John, maybe you want to explain that little complicated diagram that we have on screen.
I'll try to simplify it. So, at the end of the day, when you're looking at innovating, it's really starting with articulating what's the big problem or the big challenge that you're having. So innovation always starts with strategy. What's the strategy you have for your organization to help grow, et cetera? So it starts with the strategic element of the organization. And what we use in innovation engineering is creating a blue card. And that's really the mission that you're trying to accomplish. It's a narrative. It's focusing on what the problem is exactly, what are exclusions and constraints. So we always start there when we're looking at creating an innovation methodology.
Right.
Secondly, once we articulate the mission for the organization or for the problem or challenge we have in front of us, we focus on creating ideas, so idea generation. And we use multiple tools to generate ideas. We apply a stimulus and diversity, a diverse group of people, and apply some stimulus, and that generates the meaning for unique ideas. So that's the idea generation piece of it. And every innovation system has idea generation, so that's not unique. But from there, we move on to defining the idea with radical clarity. So who's the customer we're serving with this? What's the problem we're solving with this customer? What's the proof that we're going to focus on to solve the problem, and how are we going to do it, which is the innovation. So we articulate through communication tools these elements that are going to help solve this challenge for the innovation problem that we're focusing on. Combined with that is we run the math. We want to do some what we call Fermi estimating, do a math model on the innovation to make sure we're going to solve the problem and what's the numeric outcome of that, or leverage an opportunity for growth, et cetera. So that's what we would call define stage. So we generate the ideas, then we define and articulate through math modeling and communicating properly. Then we move through the discovery process, which is really the experimentation process, where we look at fail fast, fail cheap cycles of learning. So we try something out, we learn from it, we fail, and then we learn again. And we keep repeating that cycle until we reach perfection on the idea, basically. So we cycle through the ideas. So once we do that, then we're at the point where we can create a business case, because we've done the math modeling, we've generated the ideas, we've proven out the ideas. And then we move into the development side and the launch side of the innovation. So that's a high-level view of the innovation engineering system.
Right. I love those systems because it's really a map for different activities that you can do over and over again in organizations to really develop as many ideas as you can and have that process ongoing. So it's not about that one idea and that's the only thing that you work on. I think most organizations these days have to consider an awful lot more than that, right, John?
Exactly right. You need to filter the ideas and have as many ideas as possible, and then use the math modeling and the experimentation to narrow down to the biggest ideas to solve the problem. We also believe fundamentally that innovation can be taught. That's why we really focus on the system of innovation using the steps that I just described through.
Right. You know, and we know that the failure rate for new ideas is quite high, so you want to have an awful lot of them in the hop if possible. So let's talk about this other model from Stanford.
Yeah, so this is a model I use a lot, and one thing I should mention is you can actually take pieces of the different systems that you like, and you can combine them together and make your own system. Because there's pieces I love, large parts of most of the innovation engineering method. I also like the design thinking process, so you can combine them as well. So when I look at the design thinking process, which was developed decades ago, and then over the years has been adopted by many, many organizations, the process is that you start, first of all, by trying to understand the customer. What's and you deeply understand the customer. And some people go so far as having customers actually work on the projects with them right through the process. And you really start to really understand, because when you begin, you have a goal, but you don't understand it yet. So in the empathize phase is where you're gathering information. In the define stage, you take that information you've gathered and you redefine or reframe the question into something truly customer focused. After that, you start ideating, and so you get teams together, and then you try to come up with as many ideas as you can to solve that new problem, reframe problem, and then quickly start prototyping. And during prototyping, you're still thinking, you're still ideating. So the process of prototyping doesn't mean you're finished ideating, because ideas come through the prototyping. And then you're testing also with the customers. And this isn't a linear process. You're circling back as you learn more information. It's a great process. That's one of the reasons that it's stood the test of time.
Right.
One of my favorites.
So I love these different concepts because it just seems to build on one another. It's adding one more layer. So in this case, we're saying, well, start with the customer in mind. Remember, Al, when we talked about in a previous video about how we fall in love with ideas sometimes and the customer doesn't fall in love with ideas. So it has to be 10 times better than anything that they have right now, or else they don't buy in. But in this particular model, you're starting with the customer and therefore probably have more chances of customer loving it at the end, right?
Right. One of the tricks there is the customer may not know what they want. Or need, right? And so you're actually, in the empathize phase, you're listening to them, but you're trying to go beyond that to try and understand what their real needs are, because they may not be able to articulate the need. You're trying to understand the problems, because their solutions to the problems may not be the right solutions to the problems.
Exactly.
Right? So if you can understand the problems, you can fix it.
So I should say, John, let's talk a little bit about the search for ideas, because you use a lot of stimulus exercises just to get people out of that groupthink phase. So maybe talk to us a little bit about some of those different ways that you encourage people to think outside the box.
Right. Well, we believe that to generate what we call meaningful, unique ideas, there's kind of two necessary ingredients. One is a diverse group of people. So you want to have people thinking the same, et cetera, so you have a diverse group of people. Then you apply what we would call stimulus. So instead of, often when we're looking for idea generation, we sit in a room and look at a whiteboard or flip charts and just kind of put ideas down. That's actually a very poor way to generate ideas. So we have to apply stimulus to our brains to multiply the creativity. So one of the tools that we use is mining. We use tech mining, classic mining, and what we would call stretch mining. And that's really basically doing some research. Before we get into the idea generation side, we do some research on the particular problem or the particular opportunity. So we might look at what are the future trends in business, or what's the future trend in a particular product area. So that's what we would call future mining. Tech mining might be what are some technologies that are out there that are enabling, that could help accelerate a new product or help solve an internal system, et cetera. We also do market mining. What are the markets determining? Where are the growth areas? Where are the areas that are in decline? So we combine that together to provide stimulus to our brains. In addition to the mining that we do, we also create tools. We do, for example, mind mapping, which gets us to think in different ways to generate those alternatives and generate those new ideas. So we use stimulus mining, We use things like mind mapping or apply exercises to get us to think very differently so that we're not just trapped with kind of basic brainstorming, which is very limiting.
I remember going through your course on innovation engineering, your program, I should say, and lots of very interesting things that you can find out through patents that are not being utilized, and I think you were suggesting to people, look at even other industries and what they're doing, as an example, how they might use data, and maybe there's something that you can import into yours. You want to give a couple of examples of things that we can practically do to get people to think outside of the normal?
Well, you mentioned patent mining. That's actually a really good public area. You can go into search patents about if you're looking at a particular product or a particular even process improvement that you want to do within your organization, you can search to see if there's any patents in that area. And it's not exactly looking at the same product or service from a patent, but it's just stimulus. So if you look at something that might be related to solving the problem, then it will free your brain up to think in different ways. So patent mining is a really good way to do that, and searching patents for a particular product or an internal system is a good way to do that. So a lot of our clients, people we work with, will use it for product development, for example. We'll look to see what's out there related to a certain technology or certain process within their organization. So it's used quite often in that area.
Excellent. So you talk about SparkDeck, and so let's explain a little bit what you mean by that.
So as I mentioned, the kind of the magic formula for creating meaningful, unique ideas. Meaningful ideas mean you're solving a meaningful problem. Unique meaning it's different, right? Is applying a spark, or applying some unique ways of thinking. So the SparkDeck is exactly that. It's basically a deck of including some stimulus from the mining that I just talked about. It could be focusing on research related to what we would call unrelated stimulus. So there's two types of stimulus to spark your brain. One is related stimulus, which is related to a problem you're solving or a particular opportunity. Unrelated is totally different. So we might look at unrelated stimulus as well. So for example, if we're looking at creating a new barbecue, for example, we might put an unrelated stimulus in there, such as a rock band. And what do you associate with a rock band? It's a party, it's a lot of fun, it's a lot of loud music. Then we apply that to the actual problem of maybe inventing a new barbecue.
Right.
So the SparkDeck would have...
The musical barbecue.
Exactly, the musical barbecue. The SparkDeck would have related stimulus and unrelated stimulus to that particular problem. And it's basically a slide deck that gets you to spark different thoughts. And usually we'll ask the question on a SparkDeck, well, what do you think differently about your problem based on the SparkDeck? Or what would you do to basically accelerate an opportunity based on what you see in the SparkDeck? Right. So it's really just sparking different ways of how we think and how we see things. Again, instead of looking at a blank page and coming up with an idea, we apply this stimulus to a SparkDeck of slides that generates that unique way of thinking.
Right. One of the great advantages of having external consultants like both of you come in and encourage people to think outside, right? So you, as a process, you use blue cards and yellow cards. Maybe you can explain the difference.
Yeah, so innovation starts at the front end of articulating what's the problem that needs to be solved. Al mentioned that earlier. It's really important that you don't fall in love with the idea, that you fall in love with the real problem. So the blue card essentially creates the roadmap for articulating the problem. So it focuses on what's the narrative. Why is solving this problem really important to the organization? So the leader, this is the leader's job actually, solely is to create the blue card, the why, the purpose behind the innovation. So their job is to create the story, the narrative. Why is this important to the organization? How will it impact on our organization? How will it impact on our clients and our customers? So focusing on the narrative is absolutely critical.
We're looking for X, right?
Exactly.
And we're not looking for Y.
Well, exactly. And that's part of the blue card. We'll talk about exclusions and constraints. Because often when leaders ask for ideas, they'll say, hey, I need an idea for something, this X, whatever that X is. But they don't put exclusions or constraints. So the exclusions and constraints are actually really critical with the blue card. It talks about there might be a budget constraint, or there might be something about time. Well, we need to do this within a 3-month period. Or we're not looking for new technology, we have to use existing technology in the organization. So it saves a ton of time, and it gives basically the teams, the innovation teams, a radically clear focus of the areas that need to be worked on, which the blue card is really the mission, and it puts the guideposts in for the innovation area.
Right. And Al, you had talked about the importance in strategy to really have a plan for your innovation. So when we talk about innovation culture, we want people to come up with ideas all the time, but we also need them to be working all the time on all kinds of ideas. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, so I really like the blue card. I think there's a couple of things about it I like in particular. One of them is quite often a senior leader who's always busy will say, I'd like an idea for this. And then they walk off and they expect you 3 months to deliver something. That's not the way it works.
Right.
So you have to sit down, spend some time on this, and as an innovation consultant, I feel very comfortable saying, so why is that an exclusion? Are you sure that's an exclusion? Like, challenge. Challenge them, obviously with no one else around. Go through this with them. And at the end of it, it's something they've worked through versus just kind of told someone to go and do something, because that never ends well. I love the fact it's a tangible, I actually like the paper side of this, because it's something different and it's tangible, something you can actually have a stack of and go through them and things like that. So just that part of it is different for your mind as well. So I really like the blue card process. It's very helpful for teams to be able to kind of have those guide rails for themselves.
Even from a knowledge management system, sometimes ideas have to be shelved. The time hasn't come. So,
Right.
Having something, well, we thought about this 2 years ago, now is the time to revive it. Is great to have that kind of information.
Okay.
And what about the yellow card?
Well, the yellow card is used for employees. So when they want to articulate their idea, instead of just saying, hey, this is my idea, it really guides them through a process to articulate what they're thinking about. So the yellow card starts with kind of what's the problem? What's the problem that this innovation or my idea is going to solve? So really coming back to what's that real problem for a customer, a client, or an internal organization that needs to be solved. Focusing on who the very specific customer is. So who's the customer? Is it an internal customer? Is it for our external customers? So articulating who the customer is. Then focusing on what's the promise you're going to make. What's the promise you're going to make to that customer to solve their problem? And usually we put a numeric promise in there. We're going to increase the use of our product by X% or something of that nature.
Right.
So focusing
A
on
reason to buy.
Exactly, the reason to buy, right? We'll improve your life by X%, or we'll make your grass greener by 50% or something like that. So it's really focusing on a numeric promise.
Yeah.
Then the proof is really the innovation. So we have the team member, the employee within an organization, basically write out what the innovation is. But it needs to be focused, it needs to be in the construct of what's the problem you're trying to solve first, what's the promise you're making to the customer, and what's the proof, the numeric proof, and then writing out the innovation. So it really guides them through thinking about the specific problem they're solving.
So the blue card has said, okay, we want some innovations to fix X.
Yep.
And the yellow card are different kinds of solutions that might fix that X.
Exactly.
At this point, you haven't looked at the feasibility, right?
Not yet. This is just the idea, capturing the ideas. So instead of just writing down, just a really high-level idea, it's actually getting them to think through their ideas. So at the end of an ideation session, or what we would call a create session, you'll have hundreds of yellow cards that are related to the blue card. This is the problem we're solving. That's the blue card. The yellow card are the ideas. And then the team goes through a filtering process based on what they've gone through. What's the best idea, the top 3 yellow cards that will help solve the mission of the blue card.
So this could be run as a competition.
It can be it's very exciting. And the create session using the yellow cards, that's the most exciting part of it, is really seeing the energy, seeing the creativity of the teams. And then you have to distill it down to, and it does get very competitive,
Right.
distill it down to the best ideas. It hasn't been tested yet. That's when you move on to the math modeling. After we do the yellow cards, we'll do the math modeling and the fail fast, fail cheap cycles of learning.
Right. So we talk about skills that are needed by employees to actually convince management that the idea is going to work. So once they've done a yellow card and they're starting to make some investments in figuring out what's the market for this idea, what is the potential take-up, competition, what is it going to cost to produce, all those kinds of things. You use the Fermi estimate, Al, you've used the Fermi estimate. Maybe explain to people what that looks like, because, we don't all need to be accountants and finance people, and we don't need to get it totally right, but we need to have at least some ideas, right?
It's a starting point. It's a way of articulating what you think could be, and then it gets firmed up over time so you'll have things like death threats, you'll have the Fermi estimates, and as you're doing your fail fast, fail cheap cycles, the PDSA cycles, you'll be actually confirming and getting closer to real numbers as you go. That's the point, is you have to have a starting point.
Right. So we run this in our strategy and entrepreneurship class just for fun, to show students that they can actually start to put some numbers very quickly. So we'll say to them, like, how many cars are there in Canada? And so they have to proceed through, well, how many people of a certain age, how many of them probably drive, how many cars per household, and so forth. And they'll come up with some kind of estimate. And at each step of the way, if they can explain how they've arrived at those numbers, it's better than having nothing, right? And it's a way to make an argument with management.
And math is so key in innovation. We say, without math, there's no innovation, because you need to sell it and you need to get support internally. So there needs to be a math model. It either needs to generate revenue, profit, or needs to improve efficiency. So running the math using the Fermi estimate to start with is just a really good way to do that.
Yeah.
A final model that we have here, I thought it was important that we talk about, because lots of people know about the agile. And maybe you want to explain it a little bit, Al.
Well, in the case of the way innovation engineering works, for example, you've got all these things. You've got assumptions you've made, you've got your Fermi estimates, you've got wanting to actually be able to show customers things. So you come up with, what are you going to do this week? And you come up with a plan for that, and then you execute the plan, you study the results, and then you create your plan for the next week. And so it's continuing cycles. You could be working on, so for example, you could start out with a great idea, but you're concerned because there's some kind of regulatory hurdle that you're not sure if it's surmountable or not. So that could be one of the first things you test. So the first week, you could sit down with legal and understand that, and that could be part of it. So you're continually doing these fast cycles where you're confirming the assumptions, adjusting the assumptions, testing things in market with customers, all those things. That is getting you closer, reducing your risk as you go along, and making you better able to determine whether or not this is something that goes to market, or do you kill it and go to the next idea.
So that little diagram that we had at the top of the slide there, you enter thinking that it's going to go all smooth and it's going to be wonderful, but you have to go through these various hurdles, right?
You know what? You actually, after you do it long enough, you don't enter thinking it's going to go well. You actually you don't know. You really don't know, and you just keep an open mind, and you don't want it, because whatever happens, you're going to learn.
Yes.
That's the result. The goal is to learn and to get closer to doing something with the idea.
Right.
I think the key mindset in there is that failure is learning, right? And that's why it's fail fast, fail cheap. You go through these rapid cycles of learning, experimentation. You'll get smarter every time you do it, and eventually you'll come up with that idea. That's that killer idea that will help solve the problem.
Yeah, and even if you come up with hurdles, it's a chance to learn how other ways that you could do it to overcome that hurdle. So it's a great process. So let's talk about making choices. So now you've got all these great ideas. What are some of the criteria for picking the winners?
Well, I mean, one of the main one is how much money can you make and how risky is it? Though that's a big one. Risk versus reward is probably one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, and we always say, also in our strategy classes, that you've got to look at your core competencies, and how whether or not you have the capabilities, because it might be a fantastic idea, but I think you're a strategist, John. Maybe you want to comment on picking the right ones.
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to, as Al pointed out, what type of revenue will it drive, or what type of profit and efficiency will it drive? How directly related is it to your strategy, your growth strategy? Because sometimes you can go off course sometimes. So bringing it back to the strategies, is this really on core with our strategy? I think capabilities is exactly right, because we're limited by time, energy, and money is what we're often limited by. So can it fit into that box? There's also, and it's kind of hard to put your finger on it, but there's also an element of passion. Is the organization, are the teams, are the leaders really passionate about this idea? Because that can be that further driving factor that can see something all the way through. So I think that's a real key element of it. And the thing is, you can't do it all. So picking one area that's linked with strategy that you're passionate about, you have the capability about, and based on what you know today can drive the biggest results, those are kind of the key factors that we often see.
Right. Excellent. So let's talk about next step then. We want everyone out there to use these videos and actually implement some of those things that we're talking about. So I mean, one of the first thing on the board here is that you need to incorporate some form of ideation process. If you're serious about it, it's not just a suggestion box. Because you're not going to get much out of the suggestion box. You might have incentives that encourage people to put something in, but it needs to be a formalized process. So maybe I'll have the two of you talk about those next steps that we should all take as organizations.
If I go back to the original McKinsey framework, the 8 essentials, the first thing you do is you decide you're going to be an innovator.
Yeah.
So once you decide you're going to be an innovator, then the rest becomes something you have to do. So in order to reach that aspiration. So having a continual cycle of coming up with ideas that are aligned to your strategy, and then going through as quickly as you can and finding the best ideas, getting them to market as quickly as you can and scaling them as quickly, faster than your competitors, is essential. Or finding that they're the wrong one and killing them quickly so you're not wasting money and bothering people, and moving on to something else. Having that, I mean, that to me is very important. But that ideation program, having a really great ideation program is essential to the whole process.
Yeah, and part of that is providing people with the tools so that they understand how to ideate and use all of those mining techniques that John talked about. So here on the list we have fail fast, fail cheap, educate people. So it's educating about innovation, but also about how you determine whether an idea is good or not, how you determine what a market size might look like, putting the right teams together so that they can figure those things out, right? Do you want to give some final words on that, John?
Sure, and I think education is at all levels of the organization. Educating the leaders, what's your role in innovation? Your role at the end of the day is do something like the blue card, articulate the mission, and then bring a team together to focus on it. Sometimes leaders get too much into the weeds and try to come up with the ideas, and that throw things off. So really educating the leaders that your job is to articulate the mission, the why, the purpose, believe it, to get behind it, and then get a team in place to focus on solving the problems. Leadership commitment is also really key to put some training in place, because innovation can be taught. The things that we've chatted about already, there's systems or methodologies or mindsets that people can be taught to help do that. So they need to create enable employees to take the training, and then create the time and the freedom to explore, to allow them to try the tools out and work through the tools. And having a language for innovation in an organization is really key. So that's why we like things like blue cards, yellow cards, experimentation, so there's a common language and platform.
It's serious. Yeah.
Exactly. It's part of just like a business system. We have systems for sales, marketing, operations, et cetera. So you can have a system for innovation as well. So, and experimenting, and Al pointed this out, there's no one system that solves it all, innovation system. It's really design thinking, innovation engineering, et cetera, and whatever else works for your organization. So you pick a system, experiment with it, and then you'll learn from it. But the key is to try something and get going.
One other key thing I like to mention is having a team that can act as the coach, the facilitator, the educator, because this is complicated stuff, and it is a challenging process. And just expecting, it's great that you can teach education to everybody in the company. You can educate everybody in innovation in the company, but that's not a process.
Right.
So someone has to actually run the process. Just like you would have a budget process. If no one runs the budget process, how would that go?
Right.
I had people say to me, why do we need an innovation team? Can't everyone just innovate? And I said, great, now let's do finance and HR. Right?
Yeah, and we talked about it in strategy that you have to have a systems approach. So if you have a lot of projects ongoing across the organizations, who links them together, who makes sense of why certain projects are happening and keeps track of where it's at and so forth. So thank you both. That was very informative. And here we are, our session on ideation.
Thanks, Sylvie.
Thanks for the opportunity.